Well, game 4 at the FIDE World Championship match is over. Let's take a deep dive and see exactly what happened. Well, in the beginning, Liren opened with one knight f3. A little bit of a surprise, but we did expect Ding to actually maneuver around on the first move and try and see what Gukesh had in store for him. Gukesh actually responded with d5, and here is where things got very interested because Ding actually, second move, played e3. Wasn't what we expected, David, was it?
No, instead of Queen's Gambit, for example, instead of more traditional openings, Ding goes for a flank opening, keeping his options open. Very, very flexible stuff for white, but not fighting for the center immediately. Play continued in very traditional way. At least Gukesh tried to play very sensible, solid-looking moves. It was here, just a few moves down the line, that Ding's idea was revealed. He played this odd-looking bishop move. It's not a traditional square for the bishop. The whole idea is to prevent black from castling. If there's ever any capture, ever any trade between these dark square bishops, black loses the right to castle. Gukesh instead spent a few minutes avoiding this, a few moves avoiding this, and here we see a bishop trade now captured by the knight. And we saw a very tense middle game, Jovanka, very positional play.
Absolutely. I mean, Ding certainly took his time to get to these moves, and he decides to just stabilize the pawns in the center, make some trades, and this is his idea, to expand on the queen side, to push the b pawn forward in order to just simply advance those pawns there and probe for a weakness.
Yeah, it's what we call a minority attack. Here, the idea is for these two to undermine black's 3 pawns, to create a backward pawn, an isolated pawn, at least something to attack later in the game. But it was actually more about the knights over the next few turns, as Ding installed a very powerful knight in the center of the board. It's hard for Gukesh to kick this one away. The black bishop was forced to retreat. And it was here, the longest think of the game. Gukesh, after nearly 30 minutes, played knight to e5, a bit of a mysterious move, but a provocative move.
It's certainly provocative because it did encourage Ding to actually pick up the f-pawn, move it 2 squares, and start pushing back that knight. And we concluded that this is actually possible for white because black would be obliged to actually retreat the knight to where it came from. Now, the position is so subtle that it's still very, very finely balanced. Maybe white has a more pleasant position just because it's easier to think of a plan. And that is very simple. Just keep pushing those queenside pawns and probe for that weakness.
And that's what Ding did, but without the inclusion of this aggressive move, f4. First, he pushed his queenside pawn forward. Gukesh slid his rook across, and this might be the moment that Ding regretted. Instead of pushing the pawn to f4, which actually would have led to a small white advantage, for example, gaining space on both sides of the board. Now you can gain space on the queen side too. Very difficult for black to make moves here. If Gukesh follows the same plan, we would see a capture, and white undermines these 3 pawns with his 1 pawn, for example, possibly even landing a knight into the heart of Gukesh's position. But instead, Ding played the wrong order. He pushed his pawn forward first, meaning that in this game continuation, if he tried the same thing, pawn to f4, the black knight, not obliged to retreat this time, can even land in Ding's half, and a capture now would backfire on white. Ding would have been in big trouble here. We would have seen a capture. This knight is attacked, forced to flee from the center, and the black bishop now lands, pounces.
Yeah, that would have been a big oops moment. So naturally, Ding Liren wasn't actually tempted by that. So he couldn't push the f-pawn forward. So instead, he goes for a more solid approach. He simply tries to release the tension in the position, drops the knight back, and starts offering some trades. Gukesh duly obliges with knight takes knight, bishop takes knight. Then this is the most principled response, and this is so typical of Gukesh's style. Where he can, he will just go for direct play. So we see d4, and naturally Ding does not want to ruin his pawn structure. That would be a bad idea. So instead of capturing on d4, he just retreats the knight and says, you know what, your turn to trade the pawns.
And that is what happened. The pawns disappeared. The bishop now landed in the center. This is a fantastic move. White's bishop was a great defender, but also had influence over on the queen side. So once these pieces were removed from the board, were traded off, I think Gukesh was able to breathe a sigh of relief. He knew for the first time in this game that he was entirely safe.
Yeah, once we see more liquidation happening on the queen side, and there we do see a standoff between the knights and some further trades. And we had a very interesting middle game with all the heavy pieces on the board, but ultimately everything is very balanced. Both sides have active pieces, and now after Ding takes some time out to look after his king, we see Gukesh once again go for the most direct approach, advancing the c-pawn, just trying to clarify the matters.
Yeah, and everything pretty much disappeared. They got the vacuum cleaner out. They started trading off all the pieces. This passed pawn, it's an isolated pawn too, but this passed pawn does give Gukesh a little bit of hope. And briefly, he showed a bit of ambition here. We were speculating how he would continue. He spent a lot of time, decided not to try and force a draw immediately, instead trying to keep the tension. And it was here, with white on the brink of forcing that draw, kicking the black rook away, capturing this pawn. Here, Gukesh said, no, let's continue. He pushed his pawn to f5 and really admirable courage there.
Yes, he caused some excitement in the studio for 1 minute, but you know what? Ding is unfazed. He's not a world-class player for nothing. And so he simply just advances his king up to g2. And here we're going to see also Gukesh doing exactly the same. And there we do see the queen advance forward. And we have a very interesting standoff in this, because white can't really improve their position, but neither can black.
Yeah, black has perfect centralization here, but the problem is black's pieces are tied down defending this passed pawn, and ultimately Gukesh decided it was time to bail out with a draw. He stepped back, allowing white to force the final simplifications. We saw pawns disappear, now queens disappear, and ultimately the players decided to repeat moves. A little dance now between the white king and the black rook. The black rook forced to defend its pawn, and ultimately the position repeated itself 3 times, and game 4 ended in a draw.
A very solid draw, but Ding didn't really make too much with the white pieces. Now game 5, now it's Gukesh's turn to press with the white pieces, and that was going to be very interesting to see what approach he takes.